The fascinating concept of God needing something from a human, God needing something from us. You know, in today's world, whenever an individual or a team wins something big, there is a massive celebration. The 2009 Lakers NBA victory, their parade cost $2 million. King Charles III's coronation just 2 years ago cost somewhere around $90 million. The most recent presidential inauguration collected some $200 million. The thrill of victory is contagious. When someone feels that they have won either a sporting event or an election or something big, can you imagine what was happening in Gainesville this last week? After that game, I haven't seen any videos, and I don't have any, well, we have friends and family up there, but I haven't seen it. But I imagine that small little town was run over with celebration, just nonstop, and I'm sure a lot of people got in trouble. But that's the thrill of victory, and we're so excited about it. Well, in most of our Bibles, this text that Raphael read is referred to as the triumphal entry. And when I think of triumphal entry, I think of a team or an individual who has conquered the odds and is riding high on a big kind of a float, and they're celebrating. And Jesus has had his eyes on Jerusalem for a long time, and now he's here, and they're entering into the city to celebrate his arrival as king. And yet, all of us know that it's a bittersweet moment, because in church life, we go from the triumphal entry today to Easter Sunday resurrection next Sunday, and we kind of skip over all the not so pretty parts that take place during the week. During this week, Jesus will be arrested, he will be beaten, he will be physically abused and tortured, he will be condemned to die in a mockery of a trial, and then he'll be crucified, a horrific method of execution that the Romans had perfected. And the purpose was not really to kill, it was to suffer and make people suffer. And so as we think about the beginning of what the world will call Holy Week or Passion Week, or the last week before Jesus's death and resurrection, I think it gives us an opportunity to kind of reflect on what was going on in Jesus's heart and mind and how that relates to us. Now, I'm going to make reference to a TV show, and only some of you are going to recognize it. And that group of individual are going to be people who are, how should I say it? They're like in my category, and I don't mean Asian. So, do any of you remember the ABC show, The Wide World of Sports? Yeah, there's a certain group of us, and the others, the kids are saying, yeah, what was that? Well, that was back in a day when you couldn't watch sports 24/7, and you had to wait till Saturday afternoon, and the show would come on, and you would see a snippet of different sports from all around the world. I don't even know if ESPN had been created. Yes, there used to be a time, kids, when ESPN did not exist. And so we waited for Saturday afternoon to watch the Wide World of Sports. And it began with Jim McKay was the announcer, and he would talk about the thrill of victory, and it would show people winning races and achieving wonderful things. And then the agony of defeat. The guy coming down the ski ramp, and he lost his footing and lost his way, and he goes sideways, and he slides off this ski ramp doing I don't know what speed, and then the agony of defeat. Well, I think, and maybe you've experienced this as well, sometimes victory comes at a high and heavy cost. And so for Jesus, this is a victory entrance into the city of Jerusalem, but it's not one without pain. You could almost say that this is the agony of victory. And you've lived through those experiences before, whether it be in school where you've just killed yourself to come up with a project or to meet a deadline. You've lived it with your kids where you have given and given and given until you feel like your heart can't give anymore, and yet you do it out of love, but there's a cost and there's a sacrifice. Sometimes we've done it in work. Many of us who have gone through different health challenges have had to endure a lot of pain to get to the point of enjoying health. The agony of victory. Now, does the agony that we experience, does the agony that Jesus experienced lessen the victory when he rises from the dead? No, I think it actually makes it stronger. It makes it more meaningful to us because we know what it's like to suffer and then achieve the result. And Jesus understood it in a way that none of us can quite comprehend. The pain, the suffering, and the cost make the victory that much sweeter. Now, today is referred to as Palm Sunday in a lot of Christian traditions. And as Raphael was reading the text, do you remember them talking about palm branches and putting up? No, not in Luke. There's no palm branches mentioned here. And in fact, of the four Gospels, only John is the only one that mentions. They mention cloaks being laid down. So should we call this Cloak Sunday? Well, that doesn't flow quite as well. But what I do think flows is all four Gospels mention the Psalms, in particular Psalm 18, and we'll mention this in a second. And so rather than Palm Sunday, we could almost call this Psalm Sunday. Because that fits across the board with all of the Gospels and not just the Gospel of John. So we experience the agony of victory. And then we see Jesus entering into Jerusalem on a donkey. Now, we've heard this story so many times that it's easy to miss some of the points and the finer points. Does it seem strange to you that Jesus is riding? I mean, when's the last time in the Gospels you saw Jesus riding an animal? Like, never. How did Jesus get from point A to point B? Over and over and over, the scriptures tell us he walked. So why didn't he just walk into Jerusalem like he had done his entire 3 years of public ministry, and the way that he and his family went to Jerusalem when they were young and their pilgrimages? Well, he did it because there was a text in Zechariah chapter 9, and Jesus wanted to fulfill that Old Testament prophecy because it was true to who he was. That text says, "Rejoice, O people of Zion. Shout in triumph, O people of Jerusalem. Look, your king is coming to you. He is righteous and victorious, yet he is humble, riding on a donkey." When kings wanted to enter and show their power and their strength and their status, they would ride on horses. Donkeys were kind of working man's option of an animal that would be used for that purpose. And so Jesus wants to fulfill this verse and at the same time remind all of those present as well as remind us that humility, humbleness, and staying in touch with people was much more important than the prestige and the status that riding on a horse might give him. Now, it's also interesting how he gets the donkey, right? He tells his disciples, it's going to be over there. Just go over there and get it. And if someone asks you, just tell them the Lord needs it. Well, that makes us think that Jesus had already worked this all out. I mean, it wasn't an accident. It wasn't like all the horses were taken at the Hertz Rent-A-Horse and all they had was a donkey. No, this was planned out from the very, very beginning. All you have to say is, The magic phrase is, the Lord needs it. Just let that roll around. The Lord needs it. Jesus needed something from somebody. Somebody had to lend him this donkey. Someone had a donkey, and Jesus goes and says, I need you to lend me your donkey. It's a fascinating concept of God needing something from a human. God needing something from us. If Jesus were to show up at your house and knock on the door, you have something I need. What would that be? What would that be that Jesus might have that he would want you to give? What could I possibly have that Jesus would want? Well, I think the next point that I'm going to make explains and emphasizes that. And what the people shouted and sang from the Psalms were these blessings to the Lord and the worship to the Lord, as Robert said. And he's quoting from two different Psalms, Psalm 118 and 148. And Jesus says, or the people shout, blessings on the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest heavens. Do you remember when the angels showed up when Jesus was born? And the message of the angels was peace, but where? Peace on earth. At the beginning of Jesus' ministry and his life, the angels proclaimed the presence of Jesus is peace on earth. And now, as Jesus is preparing to return to heaven, we have the opposite, and now we have peace in heaven. But in between those times, and before Jesus will receive and achieve that peace in heaven, there is going to be a time of no peace. And Jesus even makes the proclamation that for some people, it was too late. It was too late to receive the peace that Jesus wanted to offer. And as he thought about these people missing out on the peace of God, and as he looked out over the city, he began to cry. There's two words in Greek for crying. One is used in John chapter 11, where Jesus wept at Lazarus's death. That is a weeping, a silent weeping, a quiet sobbing that might involve tears, but it's very much an inward kind of a sob. The word here is an outward, loud, mourning, wailing, weeping out loud kind of a situation. Jesus is moved to tears and emotionally touched as he thinks about these individuals that have lost the chance to experience the peace of God in their lives. They missed out, and that breaks Jesus's heart. There's a sense of loss, of frustration, of sorrow. I mean, that was the reason Jesus came to this earth, was to bring peace to people. And for the very people who saw him and walked with him to miss out on that broke his heart. Jesus is the peace, and they were looking for something else, and they missed it. Jesus entered into Jerusalem on a donkey because he wanted to show that he was coming in peace, and it broke his heart when he saw people missing out. What does the peace of God look like in your life today? How are you sensing its absence? Are there relationships or situations in your life where you feel like, I just don't have any peace? Today is a day of reflection to think about how Jesus can enter into my life and bring that peace to me that I so desperately long for, that he so desperately wants us to have. I mean, after all, he gave his life so that we would have peace. I've never been there. I've traveled around the world, but I've never been to the Holy Lands. But they say halfway down the Mount of Olives, there's a small chapel, and it's built in the shape of a teardrop. It's called Dominus Flevit, Latin for the Lord weeps. And it's the traditional place where Jesus wept over the city. And pilgrims will gather there to share the Lord's Supper, the Eucharist, the communion, as they journey towards Jerusalem, following the footsteps of Jesus. And as they look out over a city divided, with people of different faiths arguing and fighting and even at war one with another, they pass the bread and they will say to one another, "This is the body broken for you." And then they will share the cup and they will say, "This is the covenant in my blood," as Jesus said, "shed for the forgiveness of sins." And something happens, they say, in that group of individuals, even though they come from different places, different walks of life, different countries, perhaps even different faiths. As they are united around this remembrance of Jesus, something happens, and they sense the presence of the Lord, and they sense the peace of God in their lives, even in the midst of conflict all around. Jesus gave his life so that today you can experience peace.